After we looked into the ER diagram, it is time for us to see how can we make it even stronger, which means that we are looking into the enhanced entity relationship model. That's going to be the chapters that we want to discuss. So, how can we enhance the ER diagram? The ER model concepts are sufficient to representing many databases that we use for traditional databases already. However, sometimes you will see that we want to make more accurate database schemas that reflect the data properties and the constraints more precisely. And of course, that's something we want to see. How can we make it even more precise on the design? So in this chapter, we describe features that have been proposed for schema data models and show how ER model can be enhanced into what we call the EER model. So in this idea, EER model has only two additional components. The first component is the idea of the superclass and the subclass, and that is composed of the three bulletin items that I list in outline. The second special part or the enhanced part is what we call the union, and that provides a very unique property regarding to the ER diagram. So, like I said, there are two major components. One is the superclass subclass idea, the other one is the union idea. Let's start with the superclass and subclass. In many cases, an entity type has many subgroupings of its entities that are meaningful and need to be represented explicitly because of their significance to the database application. Just use the company database as the example. Inside of the company database, there are 4 entities. If we focus on the employee entity, you can imagine that employee can be further divided into many different kinds of things. For one, is based on their job type. Employees can be subgrouped into secretary, engineer, technician, etc., or sales, or something else. And each one of that has their own properties or attributes to describe that subgrouping. As you remember, not every employee is a manager. So, in this idea, manager is actually a subgrouping of employee itself. And that is very different from the concept of job type. So based on whether or not a person is a manager, we can subgroup a manager subclass. Also, inside of the company, some of employees are permanent employees, so they paid by salary. However, there are also some part-time employees such as internship. They are paid by hourly. And based on how they get paid, their properties are going to be different. And again, they are independent from the job type or manager. A salary employee can be a secretary, or an engineer manager is also a salary employee. So they can be included in different subgroupings based on different distinctions. And how do we represent these ideas in a very easy, understandable ER diagram lies in the topic of the EER part. So, this is actually gives you a very clear of understandings that based on different separation, we can subgroup the employee in different categories. On your left side, you can see that based on the job type, they can be separated into secretary, technician, or engineer here. If that person is a manager, then there is a subclass of the manager based on the employee. So you can see that maybe there's 100 employees and there are only 5 to 6 managers here. So based on that subcategory, they can have their own relationship. So you can see that managers is able to manage some projects. So only the managers manages the project. If you are basic employees who are not managers, then you don't manage employees. So you can see that once we separate this out, this relationship only applies on the manager subcategory. On the other side, when we look into different job types, you can see that secretary has their own what we call local attribute, that is the typing speed only relevant to the secretary. Technician grade is only relevant to technician, just like engineer type is only relevant to engineer. For salary employee and hourly employee, salary employee, they have their own salary. Of course, hourly employee don't have their salary. Then they may have their pay scale, pay by hours, and they may only have some relationship to some trade union that supplies the human resources to the company. So you can see that based on this EER diagram, of course, the difference is that you have superclass and subclass concept. You may already notice. First of all, this special sign looks like a fork to me, indicates the superclass and subclass direction. Based on the open end of the fork, it indicates where the superclass are. On the bottom of that indicates who are the subclasses. It's the same thing for the secretary, technician, engineer. Also, salary employee and hourly employee. They all open up to the employee entity, indicating employee is the superclass, and all for the rest of those are subclasses. We will have a separate bulletin to talk about the single line, double line, which represents the same idea of the total and partial relationship constraints. And then we also will discuss about the small circle, put a D over there, what's the meaning of that, versus if we put an O over there, what's the meaning of that. So we will see that pretty soon. We call each of these subgroupings as a subclass of the employee entity type, and the employee entity is called a superclass for those. They are called superclass / subclass. You need to pay attention to understand this one. They are not the relationships we discuss in our ER diagrams, because you can see if it is a relationship, then we have a diamond shape. These are superclass and subclass notations, so they are not really a relationship, but they are superclass and subclass. These are also called is-a relationships, which is saying that secretary is an employee, technician is an employee. This is very different from the diamond-shaped relationship that we discussed. Let me try to explain it a little bit more. You can see that the idea of secretary, technician, engineer, they are also employees. Manager is also employees. Salary employee, hourly employee are all employees. So for employees, they create superclass and subclass of those subclasses. However, if you look into a diamond shape, you will understand one thing. Diamond shape connects two different entities. Employee is employee, project is project. So you can see that employee and project are two different things. They are connected through a diamond shape, which means a relationship here. It's the same thing. Hourly employee is not trade union. They are two different things, so they are connected through the relationship. And that is a very big difference between superclass and subclass, because subclass are entities in the superclass. An entity cannot exist in database, only be a member of a subclass. If they are in part of the subclass, that means they must exist in superclass. It's pretty straightforward. If you are a salary employee, means you must be an employee. If you are a manager, you must be a manager. A member of a superclass can be optionally included as a member of any number of its subclasses. What I'm trying to say is that if that person is not a manager, then that person don't need to be included in the manager, and that's totally fine. Depends on what is your constraint definition over there. So you can see that a salary employee who is an engineer belongs to two subclasses. If that employee number 1 is an engineer, so that person is an engineer and he is paid by salary. So you can see that that person exists in two subclasses. A salary employee who is also an engineer manager, in this case, it will exist in 3 subclasses, and that is totally fine. It's not necessary that every entity in a superclass be a member of some subclasses. So we see these pictures several times, and now you should have a very good understandings of what is the meanings of that already. An important concept of the superclass and subclass comes from the type inheritance, and this is exactly the same inheritance concept that you have in your programming languages class. An entity that is a member of a subclass inherits all attributes from the superclass and all relationships from the superclass. There are several keywords over here I want you to pay attention. First of all, the word inherits. Ask yourself, what is the meaning of inheritance? Inherits. You get things, child get things from their parents. It's not the other direction around, okay? So if the subclass inherits from superclass, that means subclass will take things from the superclass. However, superclass will not take things from their subclasses. This is a very important concept you need to understand. So again, try to understand the word of inherit. Subclasses will inherit everything from their superclass, including attributes as well as relationships. So in a previous slide, secretary inherits the attributes of name, social security number, etc. from the employee. Every secretary entity will have values for the inherited attributes. Every secretary entity will also keep all of the relationships that the superclass have. So if we look into the slides one more time, you can see that if I ask you what are the attributes describing the secretary, so you can see that the attributes describing the secretary will include the local attribute that's only exists in the subclass, which is typing speed, plus name, social security number, birthday, and address. So all the attributes in the superclass will inherit it by the subclass. So the secretary has 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 attributes describing the secretary. If I'm asking what are the attributes describing the hourly employee, then the attributes describing the hourly employees are name, social security number, birthday, address, and pay scale. If I'm asking you what are the attributes describing the employee, it is very straightforward. This is probably the simplest answer. The attributes describing the employee are name, social security number, birthday, and address. Because this is a superclass, it will not take anything from their subclasses. So don't worry about the subclass. If I'm asking you about a superclass, then those are the attributes that describing the superclass. Assume employee has, say, one relationship to the department. So that will create a diamond shape, goes to a department here. Then if I'm asking how many relationships involving in the employee, that imagination one would be the only one. If I'm asking you what are the relationships involving in manager, then the imaginary one, the department one, will count because manager will inherit that one, plus the one that comes with the local relationship, which is the manager's project here. So there will be 2 relationships involving in manager assuming that we have one imaginary relationship in this ER diagram.